know me may know that, oh, sorry. Those of you who know me may know that I'm the only sociologist at IFPRI, and we used to be two, but lost one of them. And I'm usually the voice of this room at IFPRI. But because these other voices are not so well represented here, I'm going to play a bit devil's advocate in my talk right now. IFPRI in general, it's a food policy research institute. It's one of the CGIR's sister center with CIFOR, and looks broadly at a whole set of food policy issues. It does have a lot of, it is dominated by economists, both macro and micro. And for many years, before the whole food price crisis, IFPRI had been pushing for greater investment in agriculture. And it still is pushing very heavily for investment in smallholder agriculture. But there are those within IFPRI who see these land deals as a form of investment. Now, 2 years ago, I came out with a brief with Joachim von Braun, and that came about because he was quoted in Time magazine as saying, in the Madagascar case, that Africa needed more investment in agriculture, and this could be a good thing. And I called him up and said, you know, are you flipping crazy? And he said, they only quoted half of what I said. So then we got out a brief. We thought it was important to get out a brief that tried to present both sides and be more proactive in getting out both sides of this. So it was a creative tension for me, I found, to work with various people within IFPRI to come out with a somewhat balanced perspective. Okay, there might be benefits on this, but there are all these cautions. At that point, there was not a lot of empirical evidence. And I'll skip down to this priorities for research in the coming years. I still say in getting more empirical evidence of the outcomes, the impact on local livelihoods. I still say this is really critical. However, I'm also getting to the point of saying the burden of proof is now on the people who want to say that these are a good thing, to start coming up with some cases that demonstrate that this is. Because certainly in the reviewing of the literature that I've done, most recently for a brief on gender issues, we don't have a lot of good cases that show good outcomes. So also in terms of the framing, one thing that IFPRI has been very strong on is the gender dimensions of agriculture. And I would say this has been really weak in the whole land grabs debate. I mean, even for this conference, Ben and others have been looking for, we were talking about how many, we could have 3 panels on gender, and we barely came up with enough for 1 panel on gender. And in the ILC case studies, again, very few case studies are looking at the gender dimensions. Advertisement, we have a new brief and a discussion paper that reviewed the evidence as of a couple months ago, and at least frames what are the issues here. So that part of the framing that I think is important and the research agenda relates to the gender impact. How is this different for women and men at all stages? Now, in terms of who in our research has emerged as the major winners and losers, clearly those with weak land rights are the most susceptible. Pastoralists, those who depend on the commons, and there was some interesting work on this at the International Association for Study of the Commons meetings, and Liz's paper is very clear on this, on the commons, and women as tending to be the big losers. In terms of the transnational or corporate and how important that is, I think the transnational character has been important as a rhetoric and in mobilizing opposition, but it's probably actually diverting attention from what's really going on in the preponderance of cases. And so I think there are perhaps some greater dangers of transnational in the sense that the investors may be coming in with their own perceptions of what is agriculture and not the technical capacity to actually cultivate this land. Because if they don't have grounded in local ecology, so there may be some greater dangers, but the preponderance of the cases are often domestic investors. In terms of the future farming, I think even the neoclassical ag economists that many of us like to rail against have been arguing that smallholder farming is efficient and more important for poverty reduction. But there is the question of the viability of livelihoods. Looking even at US and Europe, it often requires multiple livelihoods to keep especially small farmers in business. And in US and especially Europe, you know, agritourism and some of these other options may be available. I think we need to look at what are the multiple livelihood options that might keep smallholders in business in developing countries. So now, coming back to this point about the priorities for research, one of the perspectives of IFPRI is that we have country offices in quite a number of countries in Africa. These are dealing directly with the Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Finance, and such. Now, I've had a lot of discussion with the country office people, and they say, look, discussions about the discourse and all of this other stuff is not going to get me any traction. The government doesn't want to engage in that. Give us hard evidence of the quantitative costs and benefits. This is what we need to be able to open a dialogue here. Show what compare prior uses to the promised production and then the actual outcomes of this. So I think one of the implications of this is we need to do good baseline studies even before the deals are going through. So where you're hearing about these being talked about, don't only analyze the process and things like that, but try to get in and get some good baseline data. Because that's what's been missing in most of the studies. We don't know what the production system was before the deals. If the deals have already gone through, try to measure, try to document who was evicted and what happened to them, trace that back. You know, the more, yes, stories are powerful, but stories backed with numbers are often much more powerful. Especially, you know, political scientists have identified that the technical ranks in government are much more swayed by quantitative information. So, you know, putting on that hat or channeling some of my colleagues, I think I would say that that's really a priority in research. And I think those are the key points. I hope we have some more discussion on this.
Thank you very much.